And the ignorance came because when I bought my camera, good old Henry's, and they're spectacular people there, they gave me this card and they're like, this is all you need. And I never looked at the specs because I'm an idiot. SD cards are a dime a dozen. So many different companies, so many different products, and so many different speed ratings, all this different technical jargon that's on the cards. And often is a case that you'll go into a photography store and somebody will say to you, hey, this card is good enough, and they'll give you one of these cards for maybe your new Canon R, and you'll find sometimes it doesn't perform at what it should be performing with your camera, and then you're going to wonder, why did I go with this? Because somebody advised me wrong. So I'm going to show you in this video how to start thinking about what you need to be looking for when purchasing any kind of SD card for any system that you're going to be in the market for. Now, we're going to start off firstly by just explaining that I will be using the Sandisk as the example. These are the cards I use, and this is the 95 megabyte per second, and of course the 170 megabytes per second models. Now this one is being phased out to 95, and it's you can still purchase it. It's a good price point, and then of course the 170 has replaced it. These are UHS I cards, and they do good. They do well overall. They're worth the money, no problem. Now, let's take a quick look at the types of cards that I've purchased and the card reader you would need for the use of these cards. Jumping into Amazon and doing a quick SD card 128 gigabyte search, you do find a whole bunch of different cards. And all these different companies are making different types of cards with similar technology or the same technology. Some have proprietary technology in there, but in general, they're all using similar numbers on their cards to signify how fast the ratings are. So you know exactly what the manufacturer is producing, and then you can make that comparison as you look through your camera specs. Now, for me personally, this has been my purchase habit from Amazon since 2018. I bought cards from Henry's and all these other places up here in Canada, and I've had the 95 megabytes per second since 2018. It has done well, like very well. And as you can see, like you could get the micro SDs and get an adapter as well. When you're looking at it, I've started to not do this anymore. I do have a whole bunch of these, and I just found that sometimes this adapter, this might, if you overuse it, you might have some issues. And then, of course, I did buy the 170 megabytes per second. Now, the card readers, you have to look at card readers 100%. You need to buy the right card readers. One, I've made a video about Sandisk and their 170 megabyte per second card and their SD card reader. You need this SD card reader in order to utilize this 170 megabytes per second speed. Again, to clarify, you need this SD card reader from Sandisk in order to get the 170 megabytes per second read from the SD card to your computer. If you don't have this SD card, you can't get that 170 megabytes per second. I'm clarifying this. I've made a whole video on this. I will link that below, and you'll understand why I'm upset about it. The cards we're referencing today are UHS I cards, and as such, you would be needing UHS I card readers in order to achieve the speeds. In the case of this, yes, you do need this specific one. However, you could purchase anything and still get that 90 megabytes per second rating. At the same time, if you're purchasing UHS II cards, then you would need the readers for UHS II cards, period. They will read them at that speed. Now, these are generally compatible for both the UHS II and UHS I. You'll see something that says backwards compatible, and make sure it's on there, and you'll be able to use this SD card reader, for instance, for both cards. However, in the case of this card, you will not get that fast speed. Looking at the older model here, it is a 95 megabytes per second SD card. This is the speed that it will go up to. It does not mean it will be sustained there. What you want to look up is this V30 number. Now, most UHS I cards will have a V30 as sustained speed, and this means with video, it will stay at or above 30 megabytes per second. Now, when we're looking at it in terms of cameras taking pictures, well, again, until you get into a situation with a camera that needs a UHS II card, this should do you good. You will see some slowdowns, of course, but you won't have big issues. Now, the price point here for this is $40.99. This is Canadian. And in USD, this would be around $30. Now, the idea here is that they have it on sale. They're trying to sell these and get rid of them because the newer card has basically taken over and the other one has become obsolete. Now, this one has a 170 megabytes per second read. This is just read. Whenever you see a card and they have this big number here, this is reading from the card. So if you put this in an SD card reader, you should get this speed depending on your USB connection on your computer. In the case of this card, again, we need to buy the right card reader. And if you don't get the same card reader, because of the proprietary technology, you're not going to get 170 megabytes per second. What this card reads and writes at is 90 megabytes per second. It has a sustained video speed of 30 once again. So it is the exact same card, except it's got a proprietary read speed technology with that SD card reader. And as such, it's still a good price, $40.99. So, I mean, you would be wanting to buy this card. When it comes to size, 256 gigabytes is what I recommend because of the price. When you're looking at these cards, I mean, it's hands down, go for the bigger size. As you get going and you start to use your camera and say you have a model that doesn't shoot 4K yet, you're not going to use a 256 and you're going to feel like, oh, why did I buy this? But when you upgrade your camera and you're shooting 4K, you're going to love the idea that you bought 256 gigabytes. At the same time, if you're one of those shooters that shoots a lot and then shoots a lot of video and doesn't want to change their SD cards, the 256 is a no-brainer at this price point. When you're looking at a UHS II card, which is like way more expensive, now you got to like kind of consider it. Okay, that's a lot of money for a lot of space. Now we got to ask ourselves, is that worth the budget? If you want a super detailed run through of all the different specs on these cards and you want to know a little bit more so you can make a more informed decision, I can make another video. Please leave a comment below. However, what I'm going to do is leave a link to Gerald Undunn's video. He goes into a lot of detail and he does a great job is how I would do it. However, if you want it done a little bit differently so you can get a different perspective, by all means, leave that comment below. Our next step is to look at our cameras. Now, I'm going to be referencing the EOS R and the R6 in this video because I have the R, I'm thinking about the R6. I also thought about the R5, but then I'm looking at the price point and I'm saying, maybe not. It's a little bit too much. I'd rather buy another lens. And I'm looking at the whole process of what is my next move up. Now, I'm going to be looking at the next cards I'm going to be buying for the UHS II, but right now I would only be using the UHS I. So we have to look at what are we able to actually do with our cameras. Now, if you have Sony, if you have Panasonic, you'd be doing the same thing. Go and look at the specs, and as you scroll down, you will see all the file sizes for what the camera can do with still images. And again, here we're looking at the faster the card, the faster the buffer will empty, and the faster you'll reach the frames per second that it is shooting at. Now, at the same time, the more important thing is to look at the different codecs that your camera can shoot. Now, the R here does an all-eye at 480 megabytes per second. This is the fastest speed that it does have. There are a whole bunch of other settings that there are about 120, 180, 60, and you can see as we go through here that, the idea is the 4K is taking up the fastest amount, especially this all-eye. And when you're looking at this speed, you're going to say to yourself, well, what is really the speed? Now, the first thing you want to do is ask yourself, how do I calculate this? And you're just going to simply take this as the simplest route and just go into Google and do a quick speed changeover from a megabit per second to megabyte per second. And we can see a 60 megabyte per second is needed for that all-eye, period. So we're looking now at a card that is a V30, which is 30 megabytes per second. Now, the rest of the settings here are all around 120, 180. I think 180 is the highest one. So if I come back here, I can see if I do 180, I only need 22.5 megabytes per second. So that V30 will be fine. The only aspect of this camera that I'm going to struggle with is if I'm shooting 4K at 30 frames per second, and at that I will need to use the all-I to get 480 megabits per second. So this is where the dilemma comes into play. Will you be using the setting or not? If you're not going to be using the setting, then you probably won't need a faster card. However, if you do want to use a setting, you will need it. Most cameras that aren't shooting 4K will have similar settings that you're seeing here, and you won't need anything more than 200, so you will be fine with these cards. Did I use these cards for shooting in all-I with the Canon R? Yes, I did do that. Now, that was based on my ignorance, of course. And the ignorance came because when I bought my camera, good old Henry's and their spectacular people there, they gave me this card and they're like, this is all you need. And I never looked at the specs because I'm an idiot. And I was just kind of like, why am I getting some kind of like delayed movement when I'm shooting 4K in all-I? And then I looked at the specs and I just want to go back there and do what? What do you say to the person? Hey, you work here and you don't know what specs it should be at? But it's my fault. I should have checked. Now, if we're comparing the idea of the Canon R6, I'm going to scroll all the way down, go to specifications, and we're going to go right down to video, and we're going to see that there are different types of recording, Canon log, you name it. And as we enter into our favorite area here, these are the codecs, and we're going to see that most of these, again, are 230, 120, and there is your all-I at 29 frames, 4K, if you're doing a time lapse only at 470 megabytes per second. Okay. The 4K that they have in this camera is just IPB still. They haven't enabled the all-I. I'm not sure why, and this is why my dilemma is of not buying this camera. However, you would need 230 megabytes per second for this card. Again, you would come over here, do the 230, and you can see it's 2875, and you're good to go. Now, another way to calculate this very quickly is to bring up your calculator, and once you bring this up, you're just gonna come over and type in 230 and you're gonna divide it by 8 and there's your 28.75. This is because every megabyte has 8 megabits. That's all you need to remember. 1 megabyte, 8 megabits. Now, if you are shooting log, you come up to the 340 megabytes per second. And again, that is the fastest you're going to be going, which means that if we head over back and type in the 340, we will need 42.5 megabytes per second. Now, in my opinion, you can still use this card. However, you're still going to have some issues. So it's something to think about. And with that, we look at this idea of where are we saving money, what is our budget, and then how do we move up in budget down the road when we're upgrading. You can see here a quick check and we're done. That's it. You just have to check your camera, see what you need, and now we can look at it and say, well, really, we only need a V30 if we're not going to use that one feature on the Canon R, okay? And if you have the R6, like unless you're going to do like hyperlapse in 4K, you don't really need it. I did do some tests with moving 100 gigabytes over to each of these cards and back. And what you will see is that there's a significant difference in the reading. This is moving the 100 gigabytes from the SD card over to the computer. It takes about 22.5 minutes for the 95 megabytes per second card to move everything over, where you look at a 10-minute gain by using one of these 170 megabytes per second cards with the SD card reader that Sandisk offers. So this is a big jump. And this takes off like a 10-minute event out of your whole workflow is huge. It's huge. Now, when we're writing, we do see that both cards are effectively working within similar negligible amounts. Like this is like 2 different minutes here. Yes, about a minute and a half, you would say, but like it's so close. So it's not going to be a full effect on you that it's going to be like night and day. But the reading, this makes a big difference on the workflow. Now, the other thing to consider is that if you're transferring smaller files like images, you will find a decrease in the speed. Here we have 152 megabytes per second instead of that 168 we were averaging before with the 170 megabytes second card. Now, this is normal. And you will see this here with the 95 megabyte per second card is transferring at 90. On the writing, it'll be even slower, and we're seeing this decrease down to 80 for the 170 megabytes per second card and 71 for that 95 megabytes per second card. So there is always a decrease, and we'll see this for any kind of file system. Whenever the file is smaller, you logically will see a slower transfer rate. So some will look at the speed difference and say, well, it's not a really big deal. And it isn't for people that don't use their cameras every day, that don't do work with their cameras every day, that don't do big data transfers every day. If you're doing big data transfers like 100 gigabytes, this time difference is a game changer because every day you are saving time. But if you're just doing stuff once a week, once every 2 weeks, or every month, well, then you're not going to see the difference. Yes, you'll bang your head against the wall when you're waiting for it to go, all right, it's transferring. But overall, like, it won't matter to you that much. But if you're doing it every day, you're banging your head twice as fast. And what I can tell you right now, the UHS II cards that I'm testing at 300 megabytes per second, man, those are super fast. And it's, you're looking at going from these 20 plus minutes to, that 10 plus minutes, and now to 5 plus minutes, and your life is just changing because right now, as I'm recording this, maybe I'll make a mistake. And as I'm editing, I'll have to jump over here, record another 5 minutes. That's going to translate into a lot of time for transfer on the 95 versus the 300 megabytes per second. And you sit there and you go, oh, wow, this is making a difference. Now, I saw that difference when I went from 95 to 170. It made a significant improvement to my workflow. And if you're looking for that, I have nothing more to say than, yeah, you should be buying this card over other cards that don't have 170 megabytes per second when you're looking at UHS I. When you're looking at UHS II, yes, those are super faster, but they cost a lot. And is that really worth it for you so you can improve your workflow? If you have a lot of employees and you're working with a lot of different projects at any one time and you got to do a lot of transfers, then yeah, it's worth upgrading. But at the same time, it's costly, and you got to think about that. Okay. When these cards came out, the 170 megabytes per second, they were more expensive. The price has dropped significantly. Okay, gone are the days where you're paying way more money. And this is where we are with UHS II cards. Eventually, they will come down in price. And you got to wait for that opportunity to happen if you're really budget conscious. If you're not, then go for the UHS II, 100%. It'll change your life. When you do a quick search for top SD cards 2021, what you'll find is a lot of different reviewers talking about what is best for them in their opinion based on the different tests they do. And you do see different information that they are sharing and why they're sharing it. You want to take the opportunity to read and look at what everybody says before you make a decision. Now, there are opinions, and the reason there are opinions is because everybody's got an opinion about what is best based on their experience and their tests. In most cases, they're doing tests like this with Crystal Dismark, and at that, they're looking at it and they're saying, okay, how fast is this card moving? Now, in my case, I am showing this test so you can be more aware, and this is 97 megabytes per second on the read and 87 on the write. This is sequential reads. And this is the 95 megabytes per second card. Now, when you're looking at it and you're saying, well, Nico, you told me it was 95. Well, yes, and it is reading a little bit faster than that because UHS I can go up to about 104 megabytes per second. Now, the second card, the 170 megabytes per second, is hitting read speeds of 164 in my case. And the write's hitting around 100 megabytes per second. So these are big numbers if you think about it when we're looking at this test. However, I find it more important to do the test I showed you because I want to see that transfer rate of 100 gigabytes. What is actually happening in that case? I want to make sure you see that so you can understand, hey, what's actually going to happen through that time instead of how fast is this card and what is it actually performing at in that one use case scenario of just transferring data. Because we have other scenarios, some of these cards overheat. I had a Lexar that I was using, and I thought it was like the best of the best, because everybody said it was, that I talked to, again, experience. And what ended up happening was it overheated, and then it just didn't do what it had to do. So these are the type of things that I'm testing. And of course, you need to test whenever you get a card. Shoot video for a while to see what's going to happen with your system. Will it overheat? Will it start to slow down? Will you see some issues? what actually occurs. Make sure that the card is working. And a lot of the times when you're looking at some of these websites like Amazon and you try to purchase from a third party, some of their cards are fake, and you got to make sure that you test the card fully and fill it up, make sure that it is actually doing what it's doing, run a crystal disc mark to make sure that it's doing exactly what you thought it should be doing with the price point that you paid for. Lastly, pay attention to the different software that exists out there. Blackmagic has a good one here where it's showing you the different types of codecs that they use and what results you're going to get with this card, and it tells you, hey, do you need something better for this? And you can see here there's a lot of little X's everywhere. The idea here is that if you find some of these softwares, again, this is just doing a test to see how good the response rate is. It's not doing an overall test of long sustained video shoots or photo shoots. So, when you're looking at it and saying, yeah, it's a check mark here for ProRes 422, you're looking at it and you're saying, well, what if I'm shooting something for, half an hour to an hour? What happens? Can this actually do the job? You need to make sure that whatever card you're buying, that it's reliable. Make sure they stand behind their word on what the card can deliver on. If you buy a card from a third party, make sure you trust the third party. Is it reliable? Because there's nothing worse than buying a card and it not being reliable. And halfway through your shoot, it overheats or stops working, or you have a corrupted file. Now, one of the newer version of these cards, I had an issue where it corrupted. And it wasn't, I had transferred everything over, I went to put it in the camera, and then it wouldn't read. I contacted Sandisk, and I asked them, hey, what should I do? They run me through a whole bunch of troubleshooting. It didn't really pan out. And then I thought I'd do another long format for the second time, and then all of a sudden, all the issues went away. Not sure what it was, but I am sending this card back in. They've already told me, send it in, don't risk it. That is reliability. And this is why I've always stuck by this company. It's been great, but this whole issue with the card readers, and now me thinking about, okay, I've had this issue. I'm looking at it of buying the new cameras. I will be shooting with the UHS II cards on this R because it does have 480 megabits per second. So I might as well buy the UHS II cards. I decided to go with the Pro grade for the card reader. And I'm like, well, I can't use these cards at 170 anymore with this, but this is like super fast for the new cards. And at the same time, I'm testing Sandisk UHS II cards and I'm finding some issues. So I'm kind of getting disappointed in the company as a whole. And that reliability factor, although it is there, it's still, I just feel like I'm moving into that pro phase of my career with the team and when we go out shooting, and I need to be able to have more reliability overall. So that is a critical aspect. Do not cheap out on the card. Do not. If you're going to spend the extra 10 bucks, 20 bucks, 30 bucks, and you're like, you're ready to go, but then something stops you and you go buy the cheaper one, you will regret it. This is my thing. I've done it before. I've been there where I see something, it goes on sale, and then I'm like, well, I might as well try that. And then you see the end results of that. So take some time, think about this all. Leave your questions, comments, concerns, discrepancies below. And of course, check out these 2 videos.